The year was 356 BCE. The kingdom of Macedonia, a rugged land of mountains and fertile plains, lay in the northern fringes of Greece. To many southern Greeks, Macedon was a semi-barbaric land, a place of hardy warriors, but little refinement. Yet, within this kingdom, a dynasty was rising under King Philip II, a man of vision and iron discipline. It was in the royal palace of Pella, the Macedonian capital, that a child was born who would alter the course of history forever. His name was Alexander, the son of King Philip and Queen Olympias. From the moment of his birth, myths and omens surrounded him. Ancient writers later claimed that extraordinary signs accompanied his arrival. On the night Olympias gave birth, the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the seven wonders of the world, was consumed by fire. To the Greeks, this was no coincidence. It was fate. Seers proclaimed that while one marvel had been destroyed, another had been born into the world. They whispered that Alexander's birth marked the rise of a power so great that the world itself would never be the same. Olympias herself was deeply religious, a woman of intensity and passion. She practiced strange and mystical rites, devoted to the gods, especially to Dionysus, god of ecstasy and transformation. In later tales, she claimed that Alexander was not the son of Philip, but of Zeus, the king of the gods, who had come to her in the form of a serpent. Whether this story was born from myth or politics, it planted in young Alexander the unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness beyond mortal men. King Philip II, though a man of reason and strategy, also recognized something special in his son. Philip was not a gentle father. He was a hardened soldier who had rebuilt Macedonia from a weak kingdom into the strongest military power in Greece. His dream was bold, to unite all the Greek city-states under Macedonian rule, and then lead them in a grand campaign against the mighty Persian Empire. To Philip, Alexander would not simply inherit a crown, he would inherit a mission. The world into which Alexander was born was one of constant conflict. Greece was divided among powerful city-states, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, each proud, ambitious, and often at war with one another. Macedonia itself was surrounded by hostile tribes and jealous rivals. Alexander's childhood was shaped not by peace and comfort, but by the clash of swords, the neighing of war horses, and the endless planning of campaigns. In the palace at Pella, Alexander's cradle rested among the symbols of both war and culture. Weapons and armor hung on the walls, reminders of his father's conquests, while scrolls of poetry and philosophy lay within reach, chosen by his mother to sharpen his mind. Even in infancy he was raised between two worlds, the world of warriors and the world of thinkers. As he grew, stories of his destiny were told to him again and again. Olympias whispered that he was not like other children, that the blood of gods ran in his veins. Philip reminded him that his name, Alexander, meant defender of men, a name that carried weight and expectation. The boy absorbed these ideas not as fantasy, but as truth. His earliest years were also marked by the tension between his parents. Philip and Olympias were vastly different. Philip, pragmatic and political. Olympias, passionate and mystical. Their relationship was stormy, filled with both admiration and rivalry. Alexander, caught between them, inherited traits from both his mother's fierce belief in destiny and his father's sharp, tactical mind. Later legends say that when Alexander was still a child, a delegation came from Persia to meet with King Philip. While the men of the court were entertained, the young Alexander questioned them eagerly about the geography of Persia, its people, and its armies. He wanted to know where the great king lived, what lands lay beyond Persia, and what dangers might be found there. Even then, he thought not as a child of Macedonia, but as a future ruler of the world. But before he could dream of Persia, Alexander had to prove himself worthy in his own land. From the beginning, he was surrounded by soldiers, commanders, and tutors. He was taught that life was not given to him for comfort, but for arete, the Greek ideal of excellence, of striving always to surpass others. His parents and teachers reminded him daily that honor was everything and glory was eternal. The omens of his birth, the strange rituals of his mother, the military genius of his father, all these forces shaped the boy who lay in that cradle, in Pella. To the outside world, he was just a prince in a kingdom many Greeks dismissed as backward, but to those close to him, it was already clear Alexander was no ordinary child. As he opened his eyes to the world for the first time, the seeds of destiny had already been planted. He was born into a kingdom of ambition, raised by parents of fire and steel, and marked by the gods, or so he believed. The world did not yet know it, but in that summer of 356 BCE, a conqueror had been born, one who would stride across continents, topple empires, and carve his name into eternity. As Alexander grew from infancy into boyhood, it became clear to all who knew him that he was no ordinary child. His mind was restless, sharp, and curious. Where other boys might be content with games or idle play, Alexander demanded answers about the gods, about the earth, about the meaning of courage and glory. His questions were endless, and his hunger for knowledge insatiable. King Philip, recognizing this, sought out the finest teachers in Macedonia to shape his son. At first, Alexander was taught by local tutors in Pella. They instructed him in reading, writing, music, and the traditions of Greek culture. But even as a boy, he grew impatient when lessons seemed trivial. He wanted to learn not only how to recite the words of poets, but how to live like the heroes within them. The young prince's earliest inspiration came from Homer's Iliad, the epic tale of the Trojan War. Alexander was fascinated by Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Greeks. He carried a copy of the Iliad with him, which his mother claimed had been annotated by Aristotle himself. To Alexander, Achilles was not just a hero of myth, but a model for how a man should live, fearless, proud, and remembered forever. He often said that just as Achilles had Homer to sing of his glory, he too would need a poet to ensure that his deeds were never forgotten. But it was not only tales of war that shaped him. In his youth, he was taught discipline through music and the lyre, for the Greeks believed that harmony of sound created harmony of character. He studied poetry and drama, learning the words of Euripides and Sophocles. These lessons in art and beauty would stay with him, giving him a love for culture that he would spread across the lands he conquered. Yet Philip knew that to truly prepare his son for greatness, he needed a teacher beyond ordinary men. And so he summoned one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Aristotle, the student of Plato. When Alexander was around 13 years old, he and a group of noble boys were sent to the town of Mysa, where Aristotle established a school in a shaded grove. There, beneath the trees, the philosopher taught them subjects that stretched far beyond Macedonia: logic, ethics, medicine, astronomy, and the mysteries of nature. Aristotle instilled in Alexander a love for reason and inquiry, teaching him that true leadership required not only strength, but also wisdom. But Aristotle also shaped Alexander's political thought. He taught him that Greeks were superior to other peoples, and that non-Greeks, often labeled as barbarians, should be ruled, even enslaved, for their own good. These ideas would later influence Alexander's policies, though as a ruler he would sometimes challenge even his teacher's lessons by adopting Persian customs and marrying a non-Greek wife. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander learned the names of distant rivers and mountains, the structure of the heavens, and the workings of the human body. He dissected animals to understand their nature and debated philosophy with his companions. He grew not only in intellect but in confidence, certain that he was destined to put this knowledge into action on the grandest stage imaginable. Yet Alexander was not just a student of books. Even in his youth he displayed remarkable physical ability. He trained in riding, hunting, and combat. One famous story tells of the horse Bosiphalos, a powerful black stallion that no one could tame. The animal was wild and uncontrollable, and Philip's men declared him useless. But Alexander, still a boy, noticed that the horse was afraid of its own shadow. He calmly turned Bosiphalos toward the sun so that the shadow no longer troubled him, mounted the horse, and rode him with ease. The court erupted in astonishment. Philip, overwhelmed with pride, is said to have declared, "My son, seek a kingdom worthy of yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you." This moment was more than a display of skill. It was a symbol of Alexander's destiny. Where others saw obstacles, he saw solutions. Where others gave up, he pressed forward. Bosiphalos would remain his companion in war for many years, carrying him through countless battles until horse and rider both became legends. By the time Alexander reached his late teens, he was no longer merely the son of a king. He was a thinker schooled by Aristotle, a warrior admired by soldiers, and a prince whose reputation was already spreading beyond Macedonia. He had been forged in a crucible of knowledge, culture, and discipline, and the world awaited what he would do with the gifts given to him. For Alexander, education was never an end in itself. It was preparation. Preparation for conquest, preparation for leadership, preparation to fulfill the destiny that had been whispered since the night of his birth. The stage was set. The boy who dreamed of Achilles was ready to take his first steps into the world of men, armed not only with sword and shield, but with wisdom and ambition that stretched as far as the horizon. As Alexander grew into his teenage years, the boy of omens and education was transformed into a prince of action. The court at Pella, with its bustling halls and echoing voices of warriors, philosophers, and emissaries, was no place for idleness. Here politics and ambition intertwined like serpents, and every step Alexander took as crown prince was watched with suspicion, hope, or envy. From the moment he could ride a horse and carry a weapon, Alexander was expected to prove himself worthy of the throne. His father, Philip II, had built Macedonia into a power feared across Greece, and many believed no heir could possibly match his cunning or strength. But Alexander, even as a youth, showed flashes of brilliance that startled both friends and enemies alike. One of the earliest signs of his leadership came when he was left as regent of Macedonia at just 16 years old. Philip was away on campaign, and rebellions stirred among the Thracian tribes to the north. For many, the sight of a teenage boy in command must have seemed like an opportunity for revolt. But Alexander acted with speed and decisiveness. Gathering an army, he marched against the rebels, crushed them in battle, and drove them from their lands. To secure his victory, he He founded a city on the spot and named it Alexandropolis, stamping his own name into the map of Macedonia for the first time. This act was more than youthful bravado. It was a signal to all of Greece that Philip's son was not a passive heir waiting for the crown. He was already shaping the world around him. In these years, the bond between Alexander and his horse Bucephalus grew legendary. The story was told and retold across Greece. A massive black stallion had been brought before Philip, but the beast was wild, impossible to control. None of the king's men could tame him, and Philip, frustrated, declared the animal worthless. Yet Alexander, still a boy, stepped forward. He noticed something others had missed. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. Gently he turned Bucephalus toward the sun so that the shadow lay behind him, stroked his mane, and mounted him with ease. The crowd erupted in astonishment. Philip, overwhelmed, is said to have exclaimed, "My boy, seek out a kingdom equal to yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you." This tale became part of Alexander's legend, retold for generations as proof that he possessed not only courage but insight, the ability to see what others could not. Bucephalus would remain his companion for years to come, carrying him into battle after battle, until both horse and rider became inseparable in memory. Yet life as prince was not only about victories and glory. The royal household was a place of tension and rivalry. Alexander's mother, Olympias, fiercely protective of her son, often clashed with Philip. Olympias came from Epirus, a neighboring kingdom, and she was a woman of fiery temperament, deeply religious and utterly devoted to Alexander's destiny. Philip, on the other hand, was a man of many marriages, using them as tools of alliance. His new unions created rival claims to the throne, sparking jealousy and suspicion in the court. At banquets, these tensions sometimes spilled into the open. At one infamous feast, Philip, drunk with wine, mocked his son in front of the guests, and Alexander responded with a sharp tongue. Their quarrel grew so heated that Alexander and Olympias left the palace for a time, retreating into exile. Though father and son reconciled later, the memory of these bitter clashes lingered, a reminder that even in his own household, Alexander's place was not secure. Still, Philip recognized the extraordinary talent of his son. When the time came for the decisive battle against Athens and Thebes at Chaeronea in 338 BCE, Philip entrusted Alexander, then only 18, with command of the cavalry on the left wing. The battle was fierce, pitting Macedon's disciplined phalanx against the pride of Greece. At the crucial moment, Alexander led a devastating cavalry charge, breaking through the lines of the Theban sacred band, an elite corps of warriors who fought with legendary bravery. The victory was complete, and Greece lay at Philip's mercy. Alexander's role in the triumph was celebrated throughout Macedonia. He had fought not as a boy, but as a commander, proving himself before both the army and the Greek world. Soldiers who followed him that day would remember his courage and the sight of their young prince charging into the fray, and they would remain loyal to him in the years to come. But beneath the glory lay deeper questions. Was Alexander destined to remain in his father's shadow, forever the son of Philip, or was he already preparing to eclipse him? To many, the answer seemed clear. His ambition burned too brightly, his confidence too great. He was more than a prince of Macedonia. He was a storm waiting to break upon the world. Thus, as he stood on the threshold of manhood, Alexander was no longer simply the boy of prophecy or the student of Aristotle.
He was a warrior who had tasted victory, a leader who had stamped his name upon the land, and a prince whose destiny stretched far beyond the borders of Macedonia. The world was beginning to take notice, and soon Alexander would demand not just notice, but submission.
The year was 336 BCE. Macedonia stood at the height of its power, yet it was a power perched on fragile foundations. King Philip II, a man of immense vision and cunning, had transformed a once backward kingdom into the greatest military force in the Greek world. He had brought the fractious city-states of Greece to heel, bound them under the League of Corinth, and prepared to turn his gaze eastward toward Persia. But fate, as it so often did in Alexander's story, intervened in violent and unexpected fashion. At a grand celebration in Aige, as Philip entered the theater, surrounded by his guards and the nobility of Greece, he was struck down. The assassin, one of his own bodyguards, cut him down before the eyes of his family, his soldiers, and the assembled delegates of the Greek world. The king who had united Greece lay dead in a pool of blood, and suddenly the future of his empire rested on the shoulders of his 20-year-old son, Alexander. For many, Alexander's youth was cause for doubt. The aristocrats of Macedonia, proud and ambitious men, wondered if a boy could truly command them. The Greek cities, still bitter about their subjugation, whispered of rebellion now that the mighty Philip was gone. Even among Philip's allies, there was suspicion, for Alexander's nature was fiery, his temper fierce, and his ambitions unmeasured. Yet Alexander moved with astonishing swiftness. Before the court could fracture into factions, before his rivals could seize the throne, he asserted his authority with a mixture of boldness and ruthlessness. He ordered the execution of those suspected of plotting against his succession, including potential claimants from within the royal family. He secured the loyalty of the Macedonian army, presenting himself not as a mere boy king, but as the rightful heir to Philip's vision of conquest. When word of Philip's death spread, Athens, Thebes, and other Greek cities began to stir with revolt, believing this was their chance to break free. Alexander wasted no time. He marched south with his army, moving faster than any had anticipated. His sudden arrival in Thessaly, where a rebellion was already forming, stunned his enemies into submission. The Greek cities, realizing that the young king was no weakling, but a commander every bit as fierce as his father, quickly swore oaths of loyalty. In Corinth, Alexander was formally recognized as the hegemon of the League of Corinth, inheriting Philip's mantle as leader of the campaign against Persia. But Alexander went further. He was not content to merely inherit his father's position. He sought to surpass it. Standing before the assembled Greek leaders, he declared that he would not simply march into Asia to plunder, but to avenge Greece for the Persian invasions of the past. The ghost of Xerxes' burning of Athens, the memory of Thermopylae and Salamis, still lingered in Greek hearts. Alexander positioned himself not just as king of Macedonia, but as the avenger of Greece, chosen by the gods to lead a holy war against Persia. This mixture of boldness, calculation, and sheer charisma silenced many doubts. Those who had dismissed him as inexperienced began to see in him the reflection of Philip's genius, tempered by a youthful fire. Soldiers who had marched under Philip now looked upon Alexander with loyalty, sensing that he might lead them to glories even greater than their old king had promised. Yet the young king's throne was not secure. Enemies lingered within his court,
and rebellions could reignite at the faintest sign of weakness. Alexander knew that every decision in these early days of his reign would determine whether he was remembered as a passing shadow or as a world conqueror. Thus, with the crown newly placed upon his head and his father's empire balanced precariously in his hands, Alexander began the first chapter of his reign. Already the whispers of destiny grew louder. To his followers he seemed touched by the gods. To his enemies he was a storm about to break upon the world. And as he looked eastward across the Aegean Sea toward the vast lands of Persia, Alexander knew that his inheritance was not merely Philip's throne. It was the dream of an empire without end.
After securing his throne in Macedon and subduing the Greek city-states, Alexander turned his eyes toward the grand ambition that had been his father's dream, the conquest of the Persian Empire. Philip II had long prepared for this campaign, building alliances and training an army capable of facing the largest empire the world had ever seen. Now, it fell to Alexander to bring this vision to life, not as a dream, but as a reality carved in blood, strategy, and fire. By the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander had assembled a force of roughly 40,000 men, a mixture of Macedonian infantry, Greek allies, and his elite companion cavalry. Though this number paled in comparison to the immense armies Persia could summon, Alexander believed discipline, innovation, and speed were worth more than sheer numbers. He drilled his men relentlessly, ensuring their loyalty and readiness for a campaign that would take them beyond the familiar lands of Greece and into the heart of Asia. Before crossing the Hellespont, the narrow strait that separated Europe from Asia, Alexander performed a symbolic act. According to tradition, he traveled to Troy, the legendary site of the Trojan War, where heroes like Achilles and Hector had fought centuries earlier. Standing at the ancient ruins, Alexander laid a wreath at the tomb of Achilles, declaring his admiration for the warrior whose legacy he wished to surpass. Many of his companions remarked that Alexander saw himself as a new Achilles, destined to carve an immortal name in history. Once the rituals were completed, the army crossed into Asia. It was a moment of destiny, the official beginning of the greatest military campaign of antiquity. Alexander led his soldiers with confidence, reminding them that they were not only avenging the Persian invasions of Greece from generations past, but also bringing glory and wealth to themselves and their families. He promised them lands, treasures, and eternal honor, stirring their spirits for the battles ahead. The first test of the campaign came almost immediately. The Persian satraps, governors of Asia Minor, had gathered forces to stop Alexander's advance. At the Battle of the Granicus River, the Macedonian king faced a formidable Persian cavalry force and a strong defensive position. Many of his generals urged caution, suggesting that he wait to cross the river at dawn when the current was less dangerous. But Alexander, never one to hesitate, ordered an immediate attack. With his characteristic boldness, Alexander led the charge himself, plunging into the river at the head of his companion cavalry. Arrows and javelins rained down on them, but the sight of their king fighting at the very front inspired the Macedonian soldiers to follow with unbreakable resolve. The battle was fierce. Alexander narrowly escaped death when a Persian noble swung an axe at his head, only for his loyal officer Clitus the Black to strike the attacker down at the last moment. By the day's end, the Persians were routed. The Granicus had proven not only Alexander's courage, but also the superiority of Macedonian tactics. Word of his victory spread rapidly across Asia Minor, shaking Persian confidence and emboldening Greek cities under Persian control to rebel. One by one, towns and regions submitted to Alexander, opening their gates rather than resisting his advance. After the battle, Alexander displayed both clemency and ruthlessness. He spared the Greek mercenaries who had fought for the Persians, sending them back to Macedonia in chains as an example of betrayal. Yet to cities that surrendered peacefully, he granted favorable terms, portraying himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. His message was clear: resist and face destruction, or join him and share in the prosperity of a new order. This first triumph marked the beginning of Alexander's meteoric rise in Asia, but it was only a small taste of the challenges to come. Ahead lay vast Persian armies, powerful satraps, and the looming figure of King Darius III, who would not allow this young Macedonian upstart to march unchecked into the heart of his empire. Still, Alexander pressed forward, eager for greater victories, his vision stretching far beyond the horizon. The conquest of Asia had begun. After his decisive victory at the Granicus River, Alexander pressed further into Asia Minor, moving swiftly to secure key coastal cities that could serve as supply bases for his army. His campaign was a master class in both strategy and speed. Alexander understood that controlling the seas was just as important as defeating armies on land. The Aegean coastline, dotted with prosperous cities loyal to Persia, became his next target. Among them, the city of Halicarnassus, modern-day Bodrum in Turkey, loomed as one of the most fortified and formidable strongholds in the region. Halicarnassus was no ordinary city. Its walls were thick and high, built to withstand sieges, and its defenders were led by Memnon of Rhodes, a brilliant Greek mercenary serving the Persian Empire. Memnon was known for his cunning strategies, and he immediately recognized that Alexander's advance posed a serious threat to the stability of the Persian Western territories. The city's population, wary of war yet fiercely loyal to their Persian rulers, prepared to resist with all their might. Alexander arrived at Halicarnassus with a mixture of impatience and determination. Unlike some commanders who would have waited for reinforcements, he understood that swift action was essential. Delaying could allow Persian forces to regroup or the city to receive reinforcements from the Aegean islands. He quickly established camps around the city, ensuring that his troops were well supplied and organized for the impending siege. The siege of Halicarnassus tested Alexander's ingenuity. The city's walls were too high to scale easily, and its defenders were skilled archers who rained arrows and stones down on anyone attempting to breach the gates. Alexander responded by employing siege towers, battering rams, and coordinated infantry assaults, tactics he had studied from earlier Greek warfare, but now adapted to the scale of the Persian fortifications. His engineers worked tirelessly, constructing movable towers that could shield soldiers as they approached the walls. Memnon, however, was a formidable adversary. He employed scorched earth tactics, destroying supplies in the surrounding area and attempting to cut Alexander's army off from resources. At one point, Memnon launched a daring counterattack, hoping to break the Macedonian siege lines, but Alexander anticipated the move. Leading a cavalry force personally, he struck swiftly, forcing the Persian soldiers to retreat behind the walls. His audacity and willingness to fight alongside his men inspired the army, reinforcing their confidence in his leadership. The siege lasted for several weeks, a grueling test of endurance for both sides. During this time, Alexander demonstrated not only military genius, but also psychological insight. He offered clemency to citizens willing to surrender, while simultaneously executing calculated displays of strength to intimidate those who resisted. The combination of persuasion and force gradually weakened the defenders' morale. Finally, Alexander's persistence paid off. The city's walls were breached, and Halicarnassus fell. Memnon, recognizing that further resistance was futile, escaped by sea with some of his forces, depriving Alexander of the opportunity for a complete victory, but allowing him to consolidate his control over the city. Alexander entered Halicarnassus triumphantly, rewarding his soldiers and securing the wealth and supplies of the city to strengthen his campaign further. The fall of Halicarnassus was more than a tactical victory, it was a psychological triumph. The Macedonian army had proven that no Persian city was beyond their reach. Coastal cities along the Aegean, previously loyal to Persia, now reconsidered their alliances, seeing Alexander not just as a conqueror, but as an unstoppable force. Alexander continued to solidify his hold over Asia Minor, building alliances with Greek cities that had suffered under Persian rule and securing his army's supply lines. But even as he celebrated this victory, he knew the greater challenges lay ahead. Beyond the mountains and rivers of Asia Minor, the heart of the Persian Empire awaited, the vast plains of Mesopotamia, the great cities of Babylon, and ultimately the palace of Darius I. Each step would demand greater courage, strategy, and resilience than the last. Halicarnassus had fallen, but Alexander's journey had only begun. The world beyond Asia Minor awaited, vast and full of danger, glory, and the promise of immortality in history. With Halicarnassus secured, Alexander turned his attention to the interior of Asia Minor, determined to consolidate his hold over the region and prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the Persian heartlands. The Macedonian army, though victorious, was fatigued from constant marching and the recent siege. Yet Alexander knew there was no time to rest. Momentum was his greatest weapon, and he pressed forward with remarkable speed, moving through the rugged terrain of Phrygia and Lycia, regions known for their rocky hills, narrow passes, and unpredictable weather. Phrygia, with its highlands and scattered settlements, presented both opportunities and challenges. Alexander's strategy was meticulous. He aimed to secure key towns and fortresses while avoiding unnecessary battles that could weaken his forces. Wherever he went, he was careful to win over local populations, offering protection and favorable treatment to those who pledged loyalty, while swiftly neutralizing pockets of resistance. His blend of diplomacy and military might became a hallmark of his campaigns, earning him both fear and admiration. The march through Lycia tested the endurance of the Macedonian army like never before. The region's mountainous terrain forced troops to traverse steep paths, while supply lines struggled to keep up with the relentless pace. Alexander personally led the way, scouting difficult passages and ensuring that no unit lagged behind. His presence on the front lines inspired the soldiers, reminding them that their leader faced the same hardships as they did. During this march, Alexander encountered various local armies and mercenary forces, often dispatched by Persian governors to harass his forces and slow his advance. Despite their numbers, these forces were no match for Alexander's disciplined phalanx and highly trained cavalry. At the Battle of the River Sindus, a small but strategic engagement, Alexander's tactical brilliance was on full display. He used the river and surrounding terrain to funnel the enemy into a narrow space, neutralizing their numerical advantage, and led a decisive cavalry charge that scattered the opposition. As the Macedonians advanced, Alexander continued to integrate local knowledge into his strategy. He employed guides familiar with the terrain, negotiated temporary alliances with towns that sought protection from Persian retaliation, and cleverly utilized supply caches to ensure his army remained well provisioned. His adaptability in the face of logistical challenges was one of the reasons his forces could march faster and farther than any contemporary army. By the time Alexander reached Termessos, a fortified city perched high on a mountain, his reputation had preceded him. Many cities surrendered without resistance, recognizing that defiance would only bring destruction. Yet Termessos, confident in its natural defenses, refused to yield. Alexander assessed the city carefully, realizing that a full-scale siege could drain resources and morale. True to his pragmatic nature, he decided to bypass the city, leaving a small contingent to monitor it while the main army pressed onward. This decision demonstrated his ability to balance ambition with caution, a quality that would serve him in far greater battles ahead. Throughout the march, Alexander also strengthened bonds with his own troops. He held councils, listened to grievances, and rewarded bravery. His men were fiercely loyal, not only because of their shared victories, but also because they trusted in his judgment and leadership. Stories of his courage and wisdom spread, both among his soldiers and across the towns he passed, creating a psychological advantage over any who opposed him. By the end of the campaign through Phrygia and Lycia, Alexander had secured a broad corridor through Asia Minor, paving the way for his advance into the heart of the Persian Empire. He had demonstrated not only tactical brilliance, but also strategic foresight, combining military might with political savvy and logistical mastery. The Macedonian army, though wearied, marched with renewed confidence, inspired by a leader whose ambitions seemed boundless. As Alexander looked toward Cilicia and the approaching plains of Syria, he understood that the battles to come would be far greater than those he had faced in Asia Minor. The Persian Empire's core lay ahead, along with the formidable armies of Darius III, whose defeat would require every ounce of skill, courage, and determination that Alexander could summon. The campaign was no longer just about conquest, it was about immortality in history, about leaving a mark that would never fade. After the grueling march through Phrygia and Lycia, Alexander's army finally approached the region of Cilicia, a fertile and strategically vital area bridging Asia Minor and the heart of the Persian Empire. Cilicia was known for its narrow mountain passes, verdant plains, and well-fortified cities. Its control was essential for any army wishing to advance into Syria and ultimately confront King Darius III. Alexander's reconnaissance revealed that the region's geography could serve as both a natural defense and a potential trap, and he meticulously planned his approach. Cilicia's first major challenge came in the form of the Cilician Gates, a narrow mountain pass that controlled access from the highlands into the Cilician plains. The pass was heavily guarded by Persian forces and allied local troops, prepared to slow Alexander's advance. Unlike a typical frontal assault, Alexander used deception and feints, sending smaller units to probe the enemy, while he personally led the main army along hidden paths, outflanking the defenders. The Macedonians fought with unmatched discipline, advancing in perfect formation despite the difficult terrain. Within days, the pass was secured, and Alexander's path into the Cilician plains was open. Once in the plains, Alexander faced the challenge of confronting Darius III himself. The Persian king had assembled a massive army, larger in number than Alexander's, composed of infantry, cavalry, and war chariots, as well as the renowned Persian immortals, an elite unit known for their skill and loyalty. Intelligence reports indicated that Darius was confident, believing that the Macedonian forces would be crushed by sheer numbers. However, Alexander's reputation as a brilliant tactician and fearless leader preceded him, and he carefully studied the battlefield near the Pinarus River, identifying the best positions for his infantry and cavalry. The ensuing confrontation, later known as the Battle of Issus, was a test of strategy, courage, and leadership. Alexander arranged his forces in a phalanx formation at the center, with elite cavalry on the flanks, ready to strike decisively. Darius's army, despite its size, was constrained by the narrow plains between the mountains and the sea, limiting their ability to deploy effectively. Alexander seized this advantage, understanding that terrain could neutralize numerical superiority. As the battle commenced, Alexander personally led the cavalry charge on the right flank, striking directly at Darius's position. The Macedonian phalanx held firm against repeated assaults, their long spears creating an impenetrable wall. Darius attempted to rally his troops, but Alexander's forces pressed with relentless precision. The Macedonian cavalry pierced through the Persian lines, reaching the very position of the king. Panic spread among the Persian troops when Darius, fearing capture or death, fled the battlefield. The psychological impact of his flight caused the Persian army to collapse in disarray. The victory at Issus was monumental, not merely for the tactical triumph, but for its strategic and symbolic significance. Alexander captured Darius's family, including his mother, wife, and children, who were treated with respect and dignity, reinforcing Alexander's image as a just and honorable conqueror. The victory sent shockwaves throughout the Persian Empire, proving that their king could be defeated and that Alexander's ambition was unstoppable. In the aftermath, Alexander consolidated control over the region, securing supply lines and establishing garrisons in key cities. The Macedonians were hailed as heroes, and Alexander's legend continued to grow. Yet he did not linger long to celebrate. His vision extended far beyond Cilicia. The conquest of the Phoenician cities in Egypt lay ahead, and with it, the promise of a campaign that would etch his name into history forever. By the end of this chapter, Alexander had demonstrated not only military genius, but also the ability to inspire loyalty, manage complex logistics, and leverage both terrain and psychology to achieve victory against overwhelming odds. The Battle of Issus marked the beginning of his unstoppable advance toward the heart of Persia, setting the stage for the legendary campaigns that would follow. After his decisive victory at the Battle of Issus, Alexander turned his attention to the Phoenician coast, a critical region for controlling the eastern Mediterranean. The Phoenician cities, including Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, were renowned for their wealth, maritime power, and formidable fortifications. Securing these cities was essential for Alexander's strategy to cut off Persian naval power, secure supply lines, and establish a base for further campaigns into Egypt and Mesopotamia. Alexander first approached Sidon, a city that surrendered with minimal resistance, recognizing both the strength and reputation of the Macedonian army. This early success boosted morale among his troops and demonstrated the effectiveness of combining military might with diplomacy. Sidon was treated leniently, with Alexander granting amnesty to its citizens while placing a garrison to ensure continued loyalty. The next and most formidable challenge was Tyre, a heavily fortified island city about 7 kilometers off the mainland. Tyre was a strategic jewel for the Persian Empire, controlling the surrounding waters and providing a key naval base. Its walls rose impressively from the sea, and the city's natural defenses made a traditional assault nearly impossible. Alexander realized that brute force alone would not suffice. He would need ingenuity, determination, and extraordinary engineering to succeed. Alexander ordered the construction of a causeway, or mole, connecting the mainland to the island. This massive earthwork required enormous effort from soldiers, engineers, and laborers, all working under constant harassment from Tyrian defenders who used fire ships, arrows, and catapults to impede progress. Despite the constant attacks and the daunting task, Alexander's leadership inspired his men to persevere. He frequently visited the construction sites, encouraging his troops and demonstrating personal courage, which strengthened their resolve. As the moles slowly neared the island, Alexander simultaneously built siege towers and engines designed to overcome the city walls. These towers, towering above the Tyrian fortifications, allowed Macedonian archers and artillery to bombard the defenders, while infantry prepared for the final assault. Alexander's strategic patience, combined with relentless pressure, gradually weakened Tyre's defenses. After 7 months of siege, the Macedonian forces finally breached the city walls. The battle that followed was brutal. Alexander allowed no quarter for resistance, both to punish Tyre for its defiance and to serve as a warning to other coastal cities. His forces systematically captured the city, securing vital naval bases and ensuring that the eastern Mediterranean would fall under Macedonian control. Alexander's treatment of Tyre also sent a clear message. While diplomacy could yield peaceful submission, defiance would meet with overwhelming force. Following Tyre, Alexander quickly moved to Byblos and other Phoenician cities, which largely submitted without resistance, impressed by the fate of Tyre and the reputation of Alexander's army. With the entire coast secured, Alexander had effectively neutralized Persian naval power in the eastern Mediterranean, giving him a significant strategic advantage. The region now served as a staging ground for his next campaign into Egypt, where he would cement his status as a conqueror and a liberator in the eyes of local populations. The success in Phoenicia demonstrated several key aspects of Alexander's leadership: strategic foresight, engineering innovation, and psychological warfare. He understood that victory was not solely won on the battlefield. Controlling key locations, manipulating enemy perceptions, and ensuring supply lines were equally crucial. By the end of this chapter, Alexander had transformed the eastern Mediterranean into a secure Macedonian stronghold, paving the way for his legendary entry into Egypt and his continued campaign against the Persian Empire. After the grueling campaign along the Phoenician coast, Alexander the Great set his sights on Egypt, a land of ancient civilization, wealth, and strategic importance. The Egyptians had long been under Persian rule, but resentment toward their occupiers ran deep. Alexander knew that entering Egypt would not only provide a vital base for his campaign against Persia, but also offer him an opportunity to present himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror, a role he would increasingly use to secure loyalty in newly acquired lands. As Alexander approached Egypt in 332 BCE, he was greeted with a remarkable degree of voluntary submission. Many Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian oppression, offering gifts and pledging loyalty. In this way, Alexander demonstrated his political acumen by embracing the local customs and religions. He gained the trust of the people while avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. At the same time, his army entered Egypt with a precision and discipline that had become legendary, striking a balance between mercy and authority that ensured stability. One of Alexander's first acts was to journey to the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, deep in the Libyan desert. The journey was perilous, crossing vast stretches of harsh desert terrain, but Alexander was determined. The oracle, considered one of the most sacred in the ancient world, confirmed what Alexander had long felt, that he was divinely favored, perhaps even of divine origin. This recognition enhanced Alexander's own sense of destiny and later helped him cultivate the perception of semi-divinity among his followers. During his stay in Egypt, Alexander took immediate steps to secure his control and promote lasting influence. Recognizing the strategic importance of a port city, he founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. At the mouth of the Nile, Alexandria was carefully planned as a hub of trade, culture, and military presence. Its harbors would allow Macedonian ships to dominate the eastern Mediterranean, while its location facilitated the exchange of goods, knowledge, and ideas between Greece, Egypt, and the wider Near East. The city would eventually grow to become one of the most important cultural and economic centers of the ancient world, a testament to Alexander's vision. In addition to strategic considerations, Alexander respected the religion and traditions of Egypt. He was crowned as pharaoh in the ancient capital of Memphis, participating in rituals that symbolized continuity with past rulers. This approach reinforced his image as a legitimate and divinely sanctioned king rather than a foreign invader. By blending Macedonian authority with local culture, Alexander ensured the Egyptians' cooperation, allowing him to focus his attention on the next stage of his campaign, the heart of the Persian Empire. With Egypt secured, Alexander gained more than just land. He acquired resources, manpower, and strategic positioning for future campaigns. The Nile Valley provided grain to feed his army, while Alexandria offered a Mediterranean foothold to challenge Persian naval forces. His reputation as a liberator and visionary grew, attracting scholars, engineers, and advisors who would accompany him throughout his conquests, spreading Hellenistic culture across the regions he would soon invade. By the end of his Egyptian campaign, Alexander had achieved a remarkable combination of military genius, political strategy, and cultural diplomacy. Egypt became a loyal and stable base for Macedonian power, while Alexandria emerged as a symbol of his ambition and foresight. As he prepared to move into the Persian heartlands of Mesopotamia, Alexander carried not only an army hardened by battle, but also a reputation as a ruler capable of winning both cities and hearts. The conquest of Egypt was more than a military victory. It was a statement. Alexander was not just a conqueror, he was a leader who could unite diverse peoples under a single vision, blending force with diplomacy and ambition with respect for the civilizations he encountered. After securing Egypt and establishing Alexandria as a thriving hub of trade, culture, and military power, Alexander the Great turned his attention eastward toward the Persian heartland. His ultimate objective was the defeat of Darius III, the Persian king, whose empire stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. The confrontation that awaited would test Alexander's military genius, his leadership, and the discipline of the Macedonian army like never before. In 331 BCE, Alexander marched his army into Mesopotamia, carefully preparing for a battle that would decide the fate of the Persian Empire. Darius, aware of the threat posed by the Macedonian forces, assembled a massive army, reportedly numbering over 100,000 men, including cavalry, infantry, chariots, and war elephants. The Persians vastly outnumbered Alexander's forces, which numbered around 47,000 men, but the Macedonians were disciplined, highly trained, and united by unwavering loyalty to their commander. The two armies met near the village of Gaugamela, a strategically chosen flat plain ideal for deploying large forces. Darius hoped that his overwhelming numbers would crush Alexander's smaller army, but he underestimated the strategic brilliance of the Macedonian king. Alexander carefully studied the terrain, his troops, and the enemy's formation, preparing a plan that would exploit the weaknesses of the Persian forces. As the battle commenced, Darius's army attacked with full force, attempting to envelop Alexander's flanks. The Macedonian phalanx held firm at the center, its tightly packed soldiers and long spears repelling the Persian infantry. Alexander personally led a cavalry charge on the right flank, demonstrating extraordinary courage and inspiring his men to follow him with unmatched precision. His ability to coordinate complex maneuvers under pressure turned the tide in favor of the Macedonians. The turning point came when Alexander, spotting a gap in the Persian lines, led a decisive strike directly toward Darius the Persian king, realizing the danger, fled the battlefield, leaving his army in disarray. Without their leader, Persian morale collapsed, and Alexander's forces routed the much larger enemy. The victory at Gaugamela was complete and decisive, cementing Alexander's reputation as one of history's greatest military strategists. Following the battle, Alexander pursued Darius relentlessly. Despite being wounded and eventually betrayed by his own nobles, Darius's escape attempts failed. He was ultimately killed by Bessus, one of his satraps, ending the Achaemenid dynasty and leaving Alexander as the uncontested ruler of the Persian Empire. This victory opened the vast territories of Persia, from Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau, to Alexander and his ambitions now extended toward the eastern reaches of Asia. Alexander's approach after the battle demonstrated not only his military genius, but also his political acumen. He treated captured Persian cities with respect, often sparing their populations and integrating them into his administration. He adopted elements of Persian customs and attire, gradually blending Macedonian and Persian cultures. This policy of inclusion helped him maintain control over a vast and diverse empire, showcasing his ability to lead not only through force, but also through diplomacy and cultural assimilation. The conquest of Darius and the Persian heartlands marked a turning point in Alexander's campaign. No longer a regional power, he now commanded one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. His army, battle-hardened and fiercely loyal, followed him across deserts, rivers, and mountains, prepared to reach the Indus River and beyond. Alexander had proven that strategy, courage, and vision could overcome overwhelming odds, setting the stage for further legendary campaigns in India and the Eastern Territories. The Battle of Gaugamela and the fall of Darius III were more than just a military triumph. They were a testament to Alexander's unmatched ability to inspire, command, and conquer, leaving a legacy that would echo throughout history for centuries to come. After the decisive victory at Gaugamela and the death of Darius III, Alexander the Great became the uncontested master of the Persian Empire. Yet Alexander understood that conquest alone was not enough. Ruling such an enormous, culturally diverse territory required careful planning, diplomacy, and vision. The vast lands he now controlled stretched from Mesopotamia to Persia and included millions of people with different languages, religions, and traditions. To secure his rule, Alexander embarked on a campaign of consolidation, administration, and city building. Alexander began by carefully reorganizing the Persian territories. Instead of imposing purely Macedonian rule, he retained many existing Persian officials in their positions, often marrying local customs with his administration. This policy of inclusion earned him loyalty from newly conquered populations and minimized rebellion. Alexander also adopted elements of Persian culture, including wearing Persian dress and participating in local ceremonies, signaling to his subjects that he was not just a conqueror, but a legitimate ruler. One of Alexander's most enduring strategies was the founding of new cities, which served both military and cultural purposes. These cities, often named Alexandria, became hubs of administration, trade, and Hellenistic culture. The most famous of these, Alexandria in Egypt, would eventually rise to become a center of learning and commerce in the ancient world. Each new city served as a garrison for Macedonian troops, ensuring control over strategic locations while also encouraging the spread of Greek culture and ideas across Persia and beyond. Alexander's march eastward was also marked by the pursuit of remaining Persian leaders and the subjugation of key territories. He captured Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia, in a symbolic act that demonstrated the total collapse of the Achaemenid dynasty. Alexander allowed his troops to loot the city, yet he spared certain areas, preserving important cultural and religious sites. By doing so, he balanced the harsh realities of war with a calculated respect for local traditions, consolidating his power while fostering acceptance among the conquered peoples. Another major aspect of Alexander's consolidation strategy was the integration of local elites into his army and administration. He married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, and encouraged other Macedonian officers to form alliances with Persian nobility. By blending the Macedonian and Persian ruling classes, Alexander created a hybrid administration that strengthened his legitimacy and ensured that his empire could function despite its vast size and diversity. Alexander also emphasized logistics and infrastructure, understanding that controlling such a large empire required efficient communication and transport networks. Roads were built or improved, supply lines secured, and garrisons stationed at critical points. These measures not only facilitated the movement of armies, but also enabled trade, cultural exchange, and the spread of Hellenistic ideas throughout the empire. By the end of this period, Alexander had not only conquered one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, but had also transformed it into a cohesive political and cultural entity. The combination of military might, strategic city building, diplomatic marriages, and cultural integration allowed him to maintain control over vast territories and diverse populations. His vision extended beyond mere conquest. Alexander sought to create a lasting empire, one where Greek and local cultures could coexist and flourish, leaving a legacy that would influence the world for centuries. The consolidation of the Persian Empire and the founding of cities marked a critical phase in Alexander's career. It demonstrated his ability to transition from warrior to statesman, combining conquest with governance, and laid the foundation for further campaigns into India and the East, where new challenges awaited the young king and his loyal army. After securing the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great turned his attention eastward toward the rugged lands of Central Asia, comprising Bactria, modern-day northern Afghanistan, and Sogdiana, roughly corresponding to parts of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Unlike the relatively open plains of Persia, this region presented formidable natural and human challenges, mountainous terrain, harsh climates, and fiercely independent local populations. These lands were not only strategically important, controlling routes to India, but also culturally complex, with diverse tribes and long established local rulers. Alexander's advance into Central Asia began with careful planning and the movement of his army through difficult landscapes. Despite his troops' fatigue from years of campaigning, he relied on their unmatched discipline and his ability to inspire loyalty. The local populations, proud of their autonomy, resisted fiercely. In Bactria, Alexander faced fortified cities and experienced warriors who were adept at guerrilla tactics. The Macedonians had to adapt their traditional phalanx-based warfare to counter ambushes, sudden raids, and attacks from high mountain passes. One of the most notable challenges came from the Sogdian Rock, a nearly impregnable fortress perched on a cliff. Here, local leaders, including the notable warlord Oxyartes, resisted Alexander's forces. Traditional siege tactics were ineffective against such fortifications, but Alexander's ingenuity prevailed. He employed a combination of engineering, psychological warfare, and daring maneuvers, including scaling cliffs with ropes and ladders under cover of darkness, demonstrating not just brute force, but strategic brilliance. Eventually, the fortress fell, and Alexander gained the respect of local populations by showing clemency and incorporating local elites into his administration rather than destroying them outright. Alexander also faced widespread rebellion in the region, including revolts by local satraps and discontent among newly conquered peoples. He responded by combining military suppression with diplomacy, offering marriages between his Macedonian officers and local noblewomen, and granting positions of authority to cooperative leaders. These strategies were instrumental in stabilizing the region and establishing Macedonian authority without complete reliance on constant military intervention. A defining aspect of this campaign was Alexander's effort to integrate Macedonian and local cultures. He encouraged the settlement of Greek and Macedonian soldiers in newly founded cities, while also respecting local traditions and religious practices. These cities served as garrisons, trade hubs, and cultural centers, facilitating the spread of Hellenistic culture into Central Asia and strengthening Alexander's control over these distant territories. The campaign also tested the endurance and morale of Alexander's army. Marching through treacherous mountain passes, harsh deserts, and river crossings, his troops suffered from extreme weather and supply shortages. Alexander's leadership, however, inspired loyalty and determination. He led from the front, sharing hardships with his men and personally participating in combat, reinforcing the bond between commander and army that had been central to his earlier successes. By the end of the Central Asian campaign, Alexander had successfully subdued Bactria and Sogdiana, turning rebellious regions into relatively stable provinces of his empire. His combination of military skill, strategic city building, diplomacy, and cultural integration transformed this volatile frontier into a foundation for further eastern expansion. Moreover, these campaigns enhanced his reputation as not just a conqueror, but a master strategist capable of overcoming both natural and human obstacles in the pursuit of empire. This phase of Alexander's conquests would also serve as a prelude to his invasion of India, where he would encounter entirely new cultures, war tactics, and landscapes, pushing the limits of his army and testing his vision of a vast, unified empire. Following his conquest of Bactria and Sogdiana, Alexander the Great turned his attention southeast toward the Indian subcontinent, a land rich in resources, diverse cultures, and formidable military powers. To reach India, he first had to cross the treacherous Hindu Kush Mountains, one of the most challenging natural barriers in his campaigns. The Hindu Kush presented steep snow-covered peaks, narrow passes, and unpredictable weather, all of which tested the limits of even the most disciplined Macedonian army. Alexander's army, weary from years of campaigning in Central Asia, faced extreme cold, fatigue, and dwindling supplies during the crossing. Yet his leadership was pivotal in sustaining morale. He personally scouted difficult passes, encouraged his troops, and devised ingenious solutions to logistical problems, such as using local guides and constructing makeshift bridges over icy rivers. These actions not only ensured the army's survival, but also reinforced his reputation as a commander willing to share hardships with his men. Upon emerging from the mountains, Alexander entered the regions of northwestern India, where he encountered small kingdoms, tribal confederacies, and fortified cities. These territories were politically fragmented, but militarily capable, with armies well versed in guerrilla tactics and elephant warfare, a form of combat unfamiliar to the Macedonians. The use of war elephants by Indian rulers, particularly in battle formations, presented a significant tactical challenge. Alexander's usual strategies had to be adapted. He combined careful reconnaissance, flexible phalanx maneuvers, and the use of cavalry to counter these new threats. One of the first significant encounters in India was against King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. Porus commanded a large, well-equipped army and utilized war elephants to devastating effect. Alexander, displaying both strategic genius and tactical daring, conducted a river crossing under the cover of night, surprising Porus and forcing a decisive engagement. Despite the formidable elephants and disciplined infantry of Porus, Alexander's army achieved victory through superior maneuvering, coordination, and the relentless aggression characteristic of his leadership. After the battle, Alexander's treatment of Porus became legendary. Rather than executing or imprisoning him, Alexander honored Porus as a subordinate ally, allowing him to retain his kingdom while pledging loyalty to the Macedonian Empire. This act of strategic clemency not only secured stability in the region, but also earned the respect of local populations, demonstrating Alexander's ability to combine military conquest with political diplomacy. The Indian campaign also highlighted the cultural exchanges that were beginning to occur within Alexander's expanding empire. Greek soldiers were introduced to Indian customs, religions, and local governance systems, while Alexander encouraged the founding of new cities to serve as administrative centers and hubs for Hellenistic culture. These settlements facilitated trade, communication, and the integration of conquered territories into his growing empire. Despite his success, the campaign in India exposed the limits of Alexander's ambition. His army, Exhausted by years of continuous warfare and facing the prospect of even larger Indian kingdoms further east, began to express reluctance to continue. Reports of massive armies and challenging terrain ahead, combined with homesickness and fatigue, created pressure that even Alexander's charisma could not entirely overcome. This tension would soon shape the decisions that defined the final years of his campaign. By the end of this chapter of his conquests, Alexander had successfully crossed the Hindu Kush, engaged in major battles, and established Macedonian influence in northwestern India. He had demonstrated adaptability in the face of new terrain, unfamiliar enemies, and unconventional warfare, further cementing his reputation as one of history's most brilliant military leaders. His entry into India marked the beginning of a new phase, the intersection of Greek and Indian civilizations, setting the stage for legendary battles, alliances, and the eventual contemplation of turning back from the furthest reaches of his empire. After his triumphant victory over King Porus at the Hydaspes River, Alexander the Great pushed further east into India, determined to continue his unprecedented campaign of conquest. His sights were set on the vast plains beyond the Beas River, where legends told of enormous armies and well-fortified kingdoms. For Alexander, this was the next test of his leadership, strategy, and the endurance of his army. The march toward the Beas River was grueling. The terrain changed from the mountainous and riverine landscapes of the Hydaspes region to dense forests, marshes, and heat-laden plains unfamiliar to the Macedonians. Supplies became harder to transport, and diseases spread among soldiers and animals. The army, already fatigued by years of continuous warfare, felt the cumulative weight of endless campaigns across distant lands. Yet Alexander pressed on, driven by ambition and the desire to reach the ends of the world as he perceived them. It was during this march that the limits of human endurance and morale became apparent. Soldiers, longing for their homelands and families, began to express hesitation and resistance to further campaigns. Rumors of massive Indian armies with thousands of war elephants beyond the Beas added to their fears. Alexander, usually unstoppable in inspiring confidence, faced the first serious challenge to his authority from within his own ranks. At the Beas River, Alexander called his officers and soldiers together. He listened to their pleas and witnessed the depth of their fatigue and homesickness. Despite his desire to continue eastward, he realized that forcing his exhausted army to press on would risk mutiny or disaster. In a historic moment of compromise, Alexander agreed to halt the eastward advance. He made the difficult decision to turn back, marking a pivotal point in his campaign. The Macedonian Empire had reached its easternmost limit under his command. Before turning west, Alexander focused on consolidating control over the newly conquered territories. He founded several cities along the Beas, which served as administrative and military centers. These cities were intended to maintain Macedonian influence, facilitate trade, and act as hubs for Hellenistic culture, blending Greek traditions with local customs. His approach combined military conquest with cultural integration, demonstrating his foresight in empire building beyond mere battlefield victories. The Beas River turning point also marked the beginning of internal challenges. While Alexander remained charismatic and decisive, his relationship with his army was tested. Trust and loyalty, once taken for granted, now required constant reinforcement. Officers and soldiers who had previously followed him into unknown lands without question, began to voice concerns, highlighting the human cost of relentless ambition. Culturally, the campaign east of the Hydaspes opened new avenues for exchange. Greek soldiers witnessed Indian religious practices, philosophical ideas, and artistic styles, while Indian societies encountered Greek administration, urban planning, and military organization. This intersection of civilizations laid the groundwork for the Hellenistic influence in the region, which would persist long after Alexander's departure. Ultimately, the halt at the Beas River was a lesson in strategic restraint and leadership. Alexander recognized the importance of preserving his army and consolidating his conquests rather than risking everything for further glory. This decision would allow him to return to Babylon with a massive though battle-worn army, setting the stage for the final years of his empire and the eventual challenges that would define his legacy. By turning back at the Beas River, Alexander demonstrated that even the greatest conqueror must balance ambition with pragmatism, ambition with the well-being of his forces, and conquest with diplomacy and administration. The Eastern Campaign had expanded the Macedonian Empire, enriched its culture, and tested the limits of human endurance, achievements that would echo through history long after his death. After halting his eastward campaign at the Beas River, Alexander the Great began the long journey back toward Babylon. However, the return route was not without peril. Rather than retracing his steps through the fertile lands of the Indus Valley, Alexander chose to lead his army through the Gedrosian Desert, a vast, harsh, and arid region in modern-day southern Iran and Pakistan. This decision would become one of the most grueling tests of endurance in his entire military career. The Gedrosian Desert was an unforgiving landscape. Sandstorms swept across the plains, scorching winds drained both men and animals of moisture, and water sources were few and unreliable. Temperatures soared during the day and plummeted at night. Despite their experience in various climates, from Macedonian plains to Indian rivers, the army struggled against the relentless heat, dehydration, and starvation. Alexander's reasons for choosing this route remain debated by historians. Some suggest he sought to match the legendary exploits of past conquerors, demonstrating his ability to overcome the most extreme conditions. Others argue it was a strategic decision, aimed at avoiding potential ambushes or hostile territories along the safer route. Whatever the reason, the choice imposed immense hardship on his soldiers, who were already weary from years of campaigning across thousands of miles. During the march, the army faced severe attrition. Horses and pack animals died in large numbers, and soldiers succumbed to exhaustion, disease, and dehydration. Supplies dwindled, and morale fell sharply. Alexander, however, remained a source of inspiration, sharing the hardships of his men and pushing forward with unwavering determination. He led from the front, demonstrating resilience that motivated those who could continue. The desert march also revealed the limits of Alexander's strategic brilliance. Despite careful planning, the environmental challenges proved nearly insurmountable. He had to employ extraordinary ingenuity to find water sources, ration food, and maintain the cohesion of his army. Officers were tasked with scouting ahead for oases and negotiating with local tribes for supplies, while Alexander's logistics team worked tirelessly to sustain the remaining troops. Culturally, the Gedrosian Desert Campaign left a lasting impression on the Macedonians. Soldiers and officers recorded their experiences of extreme hardship, human endurance, and the consequences of ambition unchecked by natural limits. For many, it was a stark reminder that even the greatest victories could not shield them from the raw forces of nature. By the time the army finally emerged from the desert, thousands had perished, and the survivors were physically and mentally exhausted. Yet Alexander's reputation remained untarnished. If anything, his leadership during the ordeal cemented his image as a conqueror who could endure what few others could imagine. The Gedrosian Desert would become a symbol of the extreme challenges faced during his eastern campaigns, a testament to human resilience and the high cost of empire. Ultimately, the march through Gedrosia was more than a military maneuver. It was a trial of character, endurance, and leadership. It tested Alexander's ability to make life and death decisions under extreme conditions, to inspire loyalty among suffering men, and to persevere despite overwhelming odds. The experience would shape his later actions as a ruler, teaching him the limits of conquest and the importance of careful planning, even for the most daring of ambitions. After surviving the deadly Gedrosian Desert and completing his eastern campaigns, Alexander the Great finally returned to Babylon, the jewel of his empire. In triumph, the city, already magnificent as the administrative and cultural heart of his conquests, welcomed him as both a victorious conqueror and a living legend. Streets were decorated, celebratory feasts were held, and the citizens marveled at the spoils he had brought from India and beyond. The treasures, exotic animals, and goods symbolized the vastness of his empire, stretching from Greece to the Indus River. Yet beneath the pomp and glory, tensions simmered among his generals. Years of campaigning had forged strong bonds, but also bred resentment. Some officers questioned Alexander's increasingly audacious strategies, including the harsh desert march, which had cost countless lives. Others grew uneasy with his adoption of Persian customs, his insistence on blending Macedonian and local traditions, and his expectation of absolute loyalty. The celebrations in Babylon therefore masked a deeper underlying unrest that would eventually challenge his leadership. Alexander's return was also marked by personal reflection and strategic planning. He recognized that his empire was vast but fragile, held together largely by his personal authority and military prowess. To consolidate his rule, he initiated reforms to integrate Macedonian and Persian administrations. He appointed loyal satraps, redistributed land, and sought to foster unity among the diverse peoples under his dominion. Alexander also emphasized cultural assimilation, encouraging marriages between Macedonian officers and local nobility, while promoting Greek language, art, and philosophy across the empire. Despite his efforts at consolidation, challenges persisted. Soldiers demanded rewards for their loyalty and bravery, while distant regions occasionally resisted Macedonian rule. Alexander faced the daunting task of balancing ambition with governance, ensuring that the sprawling empire did not fracture in his absence. To address this, he strengthened Babylon as a political and economic hub, turning it into a symbol of imperial stability and grandeur. On a personal level, Alexander's experiences had begun to change him. The years of relentless conquest, the hardships endured, and the near-death experiences in the Gedrosian desert shaped him into a ruler both admired and feared. His vision now extended beyond mere military glory. He sought to forge a lasting legacy, blending cultures, creating cities in his name, and immortalizing his achievements in both history and legend. However, the celebrations in Babylon also carried a subtle reminder. Even the greatest empires are held together by the strength of leadership and the loyalty of subordinates. Alexander's triumphs were spectacular, but the seeds of future discord and intrigue had already been sown among his generals. The balance between conquest and governance, loyalty and ambition, would define the final years of his life and the ultimate fate of his empire. In Babylon, therefore, Alexander stood at a crossroads, a triumphant conqueror, a visionary ruler, and a man confronting the human and political limits of his extraordinary achievements. The city celebrated his victories, but the challenges of maintaining an empire spanning continents would soon test the very foundations of his legacy. By the time Alexander returned to Babylon, he had already achieved feats that no other conqueror in history had matched. Yet, even as he celebrated his victories, the restless spirit that had driven him across continents refused to settle. Alexander's ambitions now extended further. He dreamt of conquering Arabia and possibly exploring the unknown regions beyond the Indian Ocean. But with his army weary from years of relentless campaigning, dissent began to creep into his ranks. The Macedonian soldiers, hardened veterans who had followed Alexander from the earliest campaigns against Persia, began to question the wisdom of pushing further east. The march through the Gedrosian desert, which had claimed countless lives, left deep scars on their morale. Despite their loyalty, murmurs of frustration and fatigue spread through the camps. Some generals openly challenged Alexander's judgment, advocating for rest and consolidation rather than more daring expeditions. Alexander, however, refused to be deterred. His vision was not merely conquest, but the unification of the known world under his rule. He increasingly adopted Persian customs, wearing their royal attire and encouraging his officers to do the same. He organized marriages between his soldiers and local women to integrate cultures and create a lasting legacy. Yet this blending of traditions sparked tension among the Macedonian elite, many of whom saw these actions as a betrayal of their heritage. In 323 BCE, as preparations for further campaigns continued, Alexander's health began to decline. Whether due to exhaustion, fever, or the cumulative effects of battle injuries and harsh climates, the details remain uncertain, but the impact was immediate. The young king, who had crossed deserts, rivers, and mountains, commanding vast armies with unmatched brilliance, now faced the fragility of the human body. During these final months, Alexander held court in Babylon, reflecting on the empire he had built. He sought to strengthen administrative structures, delegate authority to trusted generals, and secure the future of his conquests. Yet even in his weakened state, his personality remained commanding. Soldiers and officials alike revered him, but whispers of dissatisfaction and unease continued to circulate. The empire was vast, the loyalty of subjects often tentative, and the cohesion of the Macedonian army increasingly fragile. Alexander's vision for the East remained ambitious. He dreamed of linking Europe, Asia, and Africa through trade and cultural exchange, creating a synthesis of civilizations that would endure long after his death. But fate would intervene before he could fully realize these plans. His health deteriorated rapidly, and within days, The man who had forged an empire spanning continents succumbed, leaving Babylon in mourning and the world in shock. Though his death was untimely, Alexander's campaigns had already reshaped the world. Cities he had founded, from Alexandria in Egypt to those in the eastern provinces, became centers of culture, trade, and learning. His conquests spread Greek language, art, and philosophy far beyond their origins, influencing generations to come. Yet the empire he built, so dependent on his brilliance and vision, would soon face the immense challenge of survival without its central figure. Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE at the age of 32 in the grand city of Babylon. His sudden death stunned the vast territories he had conquered, leaving an empire stretching from Greece to India without a clear successor. The world that had trembled at his name now faced a delicate and uncertain future. In the immediate aftermath, chaos and uncertainty reigned. Alexander had not left explicit instructions for succession, creating a vacuum of power. His generals, known as the Diadochi, each sought to secure their own position. Among them were men who had followed him through countless battles: Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, and Cassander, each possessing ambition, cunning, and military skill. Their loyalty to Alexander was unquestionable, but their desire for control over his vast empire was equally strong. In Babylon, debates raged over whether Alexander's unborn child or his half-brother Philip III Aridaeus should inherit the throne. The generals ultimately proclaimed Philip III and Alexander I, the posthumous son, as joint rulers, though real power lay in the hands of the regents and generals who governed in their stead. This decision marked the beginning of the Wars of the Diadochi, a series of conflicts that would last decades and reshape the territories Alexander had conquered. The empire began to fracture along regional lines. Ptolemy seized Egypt, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would last nearly 3 centuries. Seleucus took control of Mesopotamia and Persia, creating the Seleucid Empire, while Antigonus struggled to maintain dominance in Asia Minor and Macedonia. These divisions, born from ambition and rivalry, ultimately dismantled the unified empire Alexander had built. Yet even in division, Alexander's legacy endured. His campaigns had blended Greek and Eastern cultures, fostering the spread of Hellenistic civilization. Cities he had founded, most famously Alexandria in Egypt, became hubs of learning, trade, and culture. Greek language and ideas permeated far-flung regions, from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Art, architecture, philosophy, and governance reflected a fusion of Greek and local traditions, a testament to Alexander's vision of a connected world. Despite the chaos following his death, Alexander's military achievements remained unmatched. Generals continued to study his tactics, soldiers admired his courage, and rulers aspired to emulate his conquests. The world he touched, politically, culturally, and militarily, was transformed forever. Chapter 19 captures the shock and turmoil of Alexander's death, the beginning of the power struggles among his generals, and the enduring influence of a man who had reshaped the world in just over a decade. The empire he built would not survive intact, but the echo of his ambition and vision would continue to resonate across continents for centuries. The life of Alexander the Great, though brief, left an indelible mark on history. From his birth in Pella to his death in Babylon at 32, Alexander had transformed the world in ways that would resonate for centuries. He was not merely a conqueror of lands, he was a visionary whose ambitions reshaped culture, politics, and human imagination. Alexander's greatest military achievements, his victories at Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, demonstrated not only his tactical genius, but also his ability to inspire loyalty among his troops. He overcame vast armies, harsh terrains, and unfamiliar territories, creating an empire stretching from Greece to the Indus Valley. Each campaign spread Hellenistic culture, blending Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian traditions into a new era of cross-cultural exchange. Yet Alexander's legacy extended beyond battles and conquests. The cities he founded, especially Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning, trade, and innovation. Greek language, philosophy, and art permeated regions far from Macedonia, shaping the intellectual and cultural landscape of the ancient world. Even after the empire fractured among his generals, the Hellenistic age he inspired endured, influencing governance, military strategy, and cultural development for centuries. Alexander's life also serves as a lesson in ambition, leadership, and human aspiration. He pursued goals that seemed impossible, challenged conventions, and aimed for unity across diverse peoples. His story reminds us of the power of vision and the impact a determined individual can have on the world. Though his time on earth was short, Alexander the Great remains immortal in history, a figure whose courage, intelligence, and ambition continue to inspire awe. His empire may have divided, but his influence has never faded. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Alexander the Great and want to explore more fascinating stories from history, make sure to subscribe to History Release and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. From the rise and fall of empires to the lives of extraordinary leaders, we bring history to life while you relax and learn. Join our community of history enthusiasts and stay updated with every new story we share.